As the climate crisis worsens, the Earth's sea levels constantly rise, threatening to sink coastal countries and cities all around the world. One of the countries that could particularly suffer in the future is South Korea, since it's mostly surrounded by water and has a massive coastline of 2,413 kilometers along 3 seas. Faced with a crisis, South Korea's response is to build an expensive floating metropolis in Busan that could eventually house up to 100,000 people. This city is called Oceanics Busan, and it will be the world's first ever floating city. It's expected to be ready before 2030, the year in which Busan aspires to host World Expo 2030. In this video, we're going to talk about the impressive city and how it could inspire other floating cities in other parts of the world. Welcome back to PST Mega Projects. A sustainable floating city being built to house people as sea levels keep rising is a strange concept, but it might just be where the future is heading. In fact, we could be seeing floating cities all over the world soon, as the average global sea level has risen between 8 and 9 inches and could rise another 12 inches by 2050. Not only that, but 2 out of every 5 people in the world live within 100 kilometers or 62 miles of the coast, and 90% of megacities are vulnerable to rising sea levels, according to the United Nations Human Settlements Program. And the future does not look optimistic, with expectations that from 2050 onwards, coastal areas where 300 million people live could be flooded yearly. One of those areas is South Korea's second largest city, Busan, with a population of 3.47 million people. It is especially threatened by these rising water levels since it's the country's largest port city and has historically suffered greatly from flooding. This is why Busan was the perfect location for building Oceanics Busan, a floating city with the goal of adapting to sea levels as they rise instead of sinking like normal cities. In theory, this floating city will occupy an area of 60,000 square meters and will have 3 hexagonal modules. These modules will house 900 people at first, with 300 of them being part of a pilot project in which data will be collected to test whether the city is livable and sustainable. This way, the city will act like a living laboratory. For example, the tests will include measuring the amount of energy the residents consume, how much waste they generate, and whether it's 100% recyclable. In the end, if the city proves itself to be self-sufficient, it could grow and transform to be able to house 100,000 people. The 3 floating platforms will be connected to land with bridges. Their undersides facing the water will be constructed with biorock, which is a type of material that can be beneficial for the restoration of coral reefs and marine ecosystems. Additionally, the platforms will provide regenerative living surfaces, creating habitats that filter and clean polluted port water. The floating city also promises to use energy only from renewable sources and not pollute the air with cars, as only electric vehicles will be used on its streets. In addition to that, the city will integrate plant-based urban agriculture and water filtration and harvesting systems. Aside from housing and residential areas, Oceanics Busan will include supermarkets and intimate alleyways filled with local food vendors, crafts, and bookstores. It will be a dream place for residents and tourists who embrace a sustainable lifestyle. It also plans to benefit the entire world, not just South Korea. This is because the city will also include dedicated research areas to study which technologies could be extended to other land-scarce coastal cities in order to combat the climate crisis that threatens the entire world. The 3 firms responsible for designing and developing the prototype of the city are Bjork Ingels Group, which is known for other impressive projects like Toyota's Woven City in Japan, Samu, an architectural firm part of the South Korean Samsung Group, and Oceanics, a company specializing in floating structures based in New York. Adding to this impressive team, the project will be carried out with the help of the United Nations Human Settlements Program. While all of this sounds so good on paper, very little details about the project are known. In fact, the majority of the technical aspects of the floating city aren't known, nor are there any plans to avoid damaging the marine ecosystem with its construction. A spokesman for the city, Keqiang, explained in the middle of 2023 that the project was still in the planning stage and would last until the end of the year. According to Keqiang, the project's developers were still assessing how to build the structures, what the roadmap to obtain the necessary permits from the authorities would be, and the economic feasibility. The project's actual cost is also unknown, but Keqiang said that the estimated budget is around $600 million. What we know for certain is that construction for Oceanics Busan is expected to start in 2025 and end in 2028, in time for World Expo 2030, which Busan is one of the candidate cities to host. Even though very little is known about the project, it's reassuring that it's being backed by Samsung, a company that represents 20% of South Korea's GDP. Samsung is also planning to reveal some new technologies at World Expo 2030, so it'll definitely do whatever it takes to help Busan host the event. However, this won't be easy to achieve, since Busan is competing with cities like Rome, Riyadh, and Odessa. If Busan is chosen, South Korea will invest a massive $5.73 billion to build Oceanics Busan, a massive 855% increase from its original estimated budget. The South Korean government will also remodel Busan's North Port and undertake other development projects in the city. Overall, Oceanics Busan is South Korea's response to the rising sea levels, and it's not the only country being forced to adapt. The Netherlands' Rotterdam has built a movable flood barrier, while Indonesia is building a brand new capital, Nusantara, to replace the sinking Jakarta. But will Oceanics Busan inspire other floating cities that adapt to sea levels? The truth is, the concept of floating cities such as Oceanics Busan is nothing new. In fact, there have been several initiatives that aspire to extend New York into the sea with self-sufficient floating islands. Still, those initiatives lacked the details needed to come to fruition. Keqiang compared Oceanics Busan to Saudi Arabia's Neom's Oxagon, which is planned to be a futuristic city floating on water. The only difference, he explained, is that Oceanics Busan is being realized through an agreement with the United Nations for people who used to live in coastal areas and have had to relocate. Oceanics Busan inspired other countries to build their own floating cities such as Malaysia and Japan, which are also racing against time to counter rising sea levels. This leads us to ask, is it even feasible to build floating cities? That depends on how you define a floating city. According to Bryden T. Wang, a lawyer with a background in architecture and a construction law researcher at the Queensland University of Technology, if we're just talking about building structures that float semi-permanently or permanently on the water, we already have the technology, engineering skills, and manufacturing capabilities to build structures that will last more than 50 years. The most important thing to consider when building such cities is where they are based. Some, like Oceanics Busan, must be in calm, protected waters close to land, in the water space adjacent to a country. According to Wang, for now, Wang does not consider it feasible to build a floating city in international waters. This is because he thinks that it creates complex interactions between land-based legal frameworks and international maritime law. In the end, we can only wait and see how this turns out, and if the project is completed or not, to determine if it's truly feasible. However, with Samsung's backing, it's likely that we'll see Oceanics Busan completed in the future. According to the New York Times, a total of 54 families have already volunteered to live in Oceanics Busan and share all kinds of data for 3 years, from their sleep habits and heart rate to the volume of garbage they generate or the energy they consume. Additionally, a model of people has been chosen based on their age and their specializations, and they also agreed to have their lifestyle patterns monitored. With all of this in mind, Oceanics Busan seeks to change how we view cities and will definitely shape cities in the future. Well, that is everything for now. What do you think? Will floating cities be the solution to rising sea levels? Please let us know what you think in the comments below. And if you haven't, please subscribe and leave a like for this video. Your support helps us continue our work. Thanks again for your support, and I will see you in the next one.